I'm Kelle Corvin. Welcome back to Leaders Helping Leaders Network. We're so excited to have you all back with us this week. We have about 65 people in here, which is awesome. I'm going to turn it over here very shortly to Dean Chris, who will be the host of it, and our special guest, Alfonzo Williams. And we'll listen to their dialogue for a little while. And depending on how things go, we'll probably open it up. If you guys have questions, you can certainly use the group chat. There's a drop-down menu there where you can easily send one directly to me if you want to keep it private, or to the whole group. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dean. And I guess, would you like me to introduce Alfonso? But I think I'll let you do the honors, Dean.
Yeah, well, I think Alfonzo, he's one of those guys that doesn't need much introduction. It don't get no better than being on CNN and being a spokesperson for some of the stuff that's been going on. So, Al, great to have you today, man. So glad to see you today. It's been quite a couple of weeks here since we've been doing these webinars.
Well, Dean, thanks for having me. It has been a really huge change of events over the past 3 weeks, and we found ourselves involved in a pretty big situation out of Atlanta. Just after the last webinar I joined you on, and after talking to Hobart out of Greenville about his situation, I don't know how I found myself involved and engaged with on the national stage, but it was mainly because I heard some very ridiculous things on CNN, and I'm an avid CNN watcher, but I was just so disappointed in some of the things I heard. I thought, I've got to speak out. I've got to say something. And I wasn't looking to sell books or looking to be on the national stage, but I was doing what was right and just and fair. And that's who I am.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt, Alfonso, that you're definitely that person. And we have spent a lot of time talking to each other. And matter of fact, you and I were talking to each other on the night you were going to go do that interview from Augusta about, the shooting was justified. And I could tell the passion in your voice, how dedicated you were to be a voice for not just particularly that event, but for what's right. And the one thing I do know about you is that, it doesn't matter the color, it doesn't matter the age, it doesn't matter who it is, you're going to speak what you believe is the right thing. And I think that's very honorable for you to do that. Over the last several weeks or month even, our profession has changed literally right in front of our face in terms of what we're doing. And I think when you have events like that occur, I think as leaders, we're kind of called being reactive, but being good at being reactive. And that's very hard to do. Especially it's very difficult to know what to do right now during this time. And we've seen kind of morale plummet. We've seen officers taking another look at, this is what I really want to do. I personally believe we're going to talk about something that I really want to talk about today is we were in a retention and a hiring crisis long before George Floyd and long before this occurred, but now this has heightened that for us. And so we've got some things to talk about today. And first thing I want to hear is from you is, let me get your take on what you think's going on a national level for us and what's going on. But what's happening where you're at right now in the Atlanta area and all that? Give us an update on what's going on there.
Well, look, I think in the Atlanta situation, and I am going to be very candid, I just think we've got a political situation with the district attorney who has made some very questionable moves, who is currently under investigation, and he has sidestepped the Georgia Bureau of Investigations and has left them out of the loop. And they were the ones who were called in to investigate the shooting. And he's kind of gone rogue and done his own thing. And I think it's all politically motivated. It's very unfortunate that these two officers, it really doesn't matter what color they are, they just happen to be two white officers, but they're being thrown under the bus and run completely over by politicians, not only the district attorney who has some troubles of his own, but by a mayor who is not standing with them and supporting them and is obviously driving the train. And the chief just doesn't have a lot of say and what goes on. And I am in a position, as you know, I think nothing is by happenstance. God puts us in the right place at the right time for the right reasons. And when I took your class back in February, I think you may remember me saying that a number of times. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time for the right reasons and with the right bully pulpit to say what needed to be said. And even though it was not politically expedient, it was the right thing to do. And that's what's happening in Atlanta. And it's very unfortunate because I'll tell you, Dean, what it's done here, the actions of the district attorney and the mayor have put officers in a very precarious situation. That is, when an officer is faced with a deadly force situation, he's got to decide in a half a second whether he's going to live and go home or whether he's going to be hurt or killed. And he doesn't need to be wondering if his leader will stand with him when he makes a decision and whether or not he's going to be ostracized based on somebody's political ideology. And I think it's very, very unfortunate that is happening. And secondly, we're telling people, not only young Black youths around the country, but we're telling people it's okay to fight with the police, to be disrespectful, to resist, to fight with them, to take a weapon from them, and to run away from them, turn back towards them, and in an offensive manner, and try and hurt them. And then to have these folks these commentators who get on to CNN and say things like, well, they shouldn't have been chasing him. It's sending the wrong message, not only to law enforcement, but to the public. And we cannot tolerate that kind of disregard for law and order. The one thing that has to be constant in all that we do is that law has to be constant. And if it's not, then people feel there's injustice and unfairness and inequality, and we can't have it.
You know, Al, we spend a lot of times, especially on this network, this Leaders Helping Leaders Network, we have our podcast, and we call it Straight Talk on Leadership. And this will eventually turn in next week for our podcast. And there'll be a lot of people who are listening, you know, out there who are wanting to know what should they say and how should they say it. Now, when you're in this line of business, we walk a fine line, no doubt about it, just simply because we're in the job that we're doing. We have the greatest constitutional rights, the greatest legal rights to take people's rights from them. And most people willingly allow us to do that if we do it in a procedurally just manner, if you will. But I think we're in the midst of a discussion, and this is far deeper than that. This is race-related issues. This is at the core of who we are as a society. And you know, Al, I don't shy away from really tough questions, and I want you to help our audience out there. You know, I can't be Black and you can't be white, and there's no doubt about that. How does a leader who is white, how do they speak to their officers who may be looking at these from an Afro-American or a Black commentary and life and a lifestyle and how they see these things? What do we say to our officers who are minorities? And man, they're walking a finer line sometimes than we are. How do we speak to our officers? How do we talk to them? Because we're never going to be Black and they're never going to be white. But how do we bring people together? And from the perspective of you seeing this, because you can say things I can't say, and let's just put it on the table. Let's talk about it. How do we do that?
I learned from Hobart in Greenville the last time we had a webinar, and he said, I called in my Black leadership and I sat down and I talked to them before I went out into the streets to talk to a group of Black Lives Matter protesters. And he said he heard them, he listened to them, and he heard their perspective. And he asked them that very question: what is it like to be Black? What happens? Why do you look at things the way you look at them? There's two things every employee wants: value and respect. And as a white leader or a Black leader in an agency, you've got to value your employees and you've got to respect them. And if you value and respect them, then bring them in and have the conversation with them. He left me with a willingness to do it. I immediately left that podcast or that show, and I went and said to Lewis, Sheriff Hobart said something today that was magical. Let's bring our Black leaders in and let's sit down and have conversation, black and white. And let's talk about those really tough things that we don't want to address. We act as if they don't matter. So, but oftentimes we have leadership who says, well, I don't believe in Black Lives Matter, so I'm not going to, so everybody's bad in that group. And well, everybody's not bad in the group. You may not agree with their ideology, you may not agree with their tenets or their creed, but we can find some common ground. And we have to, the true measure of maturation is when you can respect the opinions of others, whether you agree or disagree. That's how I've been able to navigate this last week when I've been called everything from Uncle Tom to coon to bootlicker to you're sold out to the white man. How dare you make those comments on national news and right in the midst of a revolution when we're about to undergo the biggest change in law enforcement there ever is. You come in the middle of that and say what you said. How dare you do that? And I did it because I've got a servant's heart and because I don't have arrogance and because I spoke out against the injustices in Brunswick and Minneapolis. It was no more than the right thing to do than to speak out for what was just and right and fair and equitable in the Atlanta situation. Those officers just needed to be white.
You know, you've said some things right there that I want to kind of recapture on what you said right there, because I think it is so compelling, some of the things you said. First of all, you said you got to look at each other. You got to kind of go talk to each other. A lot of times, and now Hobart Scott, and if you don't know who we're talking about Hobart Lewis, who is the sheriff of Greenville County. He's got about 650 employees. He just was newly elected sheriff. And I think, you know, when you look at this, sometimes we've been in this so long, we kind of think we got this figured out. But here's a new leader. He's been there 90 days, but he uses a very simplistic thing of just go listening to his people. Now, I had a conversation with him this morning, and he and I were talking about the meetings that he's had with his employees. And later on, we might get him to chime in and talk about some of those things if he'll take time to do it. I think he's on the call. But you know, you got to look them in the eye. You got to be honest. You got to, and then I think the thing you said was be honest with them. But I think the thing that really resonates with me right there is you got to hear them. You can't just listen to them. You have to hear them.
Yes.
And I mean, that's so key right there. You have to.
We've got to get past this impasse, this whole thing of you've got to let your guard down a little bit, and you got to step out of your comfort zone, because if you've never been there, you don't understand. And if you start saying things like, well, you know, it's the typical thing you hear when we talk about race. Well, I'm not a racist. I've got Black people in my family. Well, you know, that doesn't mean anything, you know. Or if you say, well, you know, I'm not a racist. I'm married to a Black woman. Well, you know, that maybe you love her, but maybe you don't understand the culture. And it's most of it's ignorance on both ends. We don't understand each other. It's almost like police officers when they're working a special duty assignment. They don't gang up with the crowd. They gang up with one another. It's just a language that we understand, and we understand the way one another talk, and we can relate to one another, and we share some common values. What people really want to know, Dean, is two things from a leader: is can they trust you, and can they trust your product? And they're watching you every day to learn whether they can trust you and whether they can trust your product. They know whether you're genuine. They know whether you stand behind them. They know whether you're going to support them or if you're going to buckle to political pressures. They're watching every single day.
Yeah, and you know, and I agree with you 100% there. No question about it. I think we will talk about leaders have to be able to, when you look at leadership, I think the one thing we're missing here, and I'm not saying everybody's missing this, but I know if I was a police chief right now, I would be in super duper reactive mode. And it wouldn't be because, you know, I'd want to be there. It's just that every time you turn around, there's something else. It's something, the layers of this situation are so complicated. Here's what I want to try to describe in terms of dealing with this, just from my own experience. Now, one of the problems is when I deal with things at the problem level, I usually see solutions very quickly. So if I look at something as being a problem, then my mind goes to, well, I can do this and it'll fix it. Or I can do that and it takes care of it right away. But when you look at this, this is more of an issue. Issues are much more complex than problems, and they take a lot more patience and work. So stop seeing this as a problem, see it as an issue, and take the opportunity to look at long-term things you can do to try to fix this thing or work with it. You follow me? So our mindset, we're trying to see an instant fix. There's not an instant fix for the complexities of what we're dealing with today. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I've been head of 3 agencies now. I've been chief of police twice and now sheriff, and just reelected to a second term as sheriff. And when I've gone into those police agencies, generally you're going in just as your experiences have been, where things are a mess and they're calling you in because you're the fixer. And so it's so easy to go in thinking, I've got to affect this change and this change and this change to make things better. And at some point you stop and you say, well, I better slow down a little bit and realize I better listen to some of these folks who've been here. They were here before I got here. And this place is going to exist whether I'm here or not. And so not everything they're doing is bad. Not everything they're doing is wrong. Some things worked. But as a leader, as a change agent, you go in thinking, they hired me to fix everything. And so here, I think we've got to stop trying to be in reactionary mode and stop trying to fix everything so quickly, but we got to take time to talk. Every leader across this country, black or white, ought to be having conversations with the community, ought to be talking to the black community, the white community, bringing them together. We have a forum next Tuesday, June 30th, where I'm bringing in civil rights leaders, prosecutors, defense attorneys, a sociologist, clergy, laypersons, sheriff, DA, and we're going to listen to the people. I'm bringing in police trainers who are going to do judgmental pistol shooting, and we're going to teach, and we're going to listen, and we're going to explain our position and why we took a stance the way we did. So we're giving this audience a chance to hear and to learn. You teach leadership. You can't talk to me for 10 minutes and then I become a good leader. I can't take 30 years of experience and talk to a civilian for 10 minutes and get him to agree with me that the Atlanta situation was justified. No more than an officer with 15 years of experience showing up at a house to deal with a 10-year-old who won't get up and go to school. Mama's done bad parenting for 10 years, and she's expecting that officer to undo that bad parenting in 10 minutes, and it's taken her 10 years to get there.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. You know, Al, I'm gonna switch gears here 1 second and talk about external forces outside of our agency and how do we deal with some of these people outside of our agency that are really, they're how can I say it? Their intentions and their what they're trying to, it's not wholly holistic. They've got an agenda that they're playing here, and they're taking full advantage of this. And how do we deal with some of those folks? Because we all have dealt with those types of individuals. But one thing I learned as a leader, and I know this is not the time you should be going out there, and what I suggest people do is to lead on the offense without being offensive. And you've got to go out there and talk to these folks and these solutions, and you got to be able to do all those things. No question about it. But one thing I learned is you can't right every wrong. And people have to know that a leader cannot, especially a police chief or especially a sheriff, you can't right every wrong of social or racial injustice, immediately. Those things, they take time to work on, and we got to get patience to do that. We've got to work some folks to do it. But when we look at this, so how do I deal with an individual who comes to my organization and they've got this great idea they're going to try to do, and they say, all right, we're with you, whatever. And then the second something happens in our organization, they're on the front steps of the courthouse talking about how terrible that is. And there they go again. And there they go again, and now they're out there again, and you can't trust the police. How do we deal with folks like that? How do we help our folks deal with stuff like that?
I always say the cleanup starts before the crisis occurs. The cleanup starts before the crisis occurs. Before any of these events take place, a chief, a sheriff, a lieutenant, a shift commander, a precinct commander, you've got to build relationships daily. I just want another 4-year term. Well, I don't wait 3 months before the election to start talking to people and showing up at churches and events. It's every single day I'm building relationships. I'm forming partnerships with people. I'm getting to know them. My cell phone number is on Facebook. It's accessibility. And I understand if you're in an agency as large as Atlanta, you probably would want to put your cell phone number out on Facebook. So I'm in a much smaller county. We're second largest in Georgia by land mass, but certainly not by population. But I'm accessible. I'm there. And if you'll build those relationships, if you'll build those partnerships, if you'll take a multidisciplinary approach to problem solving, when the crisis happens, you've already built the relationships. We're not getting to know one another. 3 Saturdays ago, when this happened, I was already on the phone with ministers all morning saying, if we have some civil unrest, I need you on the front line. I'll pay you on the back end. I'll do something to get back with you, but I need you. Because I don't need some 22-year-old officer, black or white, who tells a guy to step back twice, and because he doesn't move as fast as he thinks he should move, he grabs him and takes him to the ground, and then next thing you know, I've got 20 officers whose lives are in danger because of his ego. So it's leadership, and it's common sense leadership. We got to have soft skills and hard skills to deal with people, and that's good leadership when we can put them both together. Your commentary, your 8 steps talk about guardian versus warrior, warrior versus guardian mentality. I call it crime fighter versus social worker. And nobody wants to be seen as a social worker. We all want to be seen as crime fighters. But in essence, we're social workers. We're dealing with people every day. Does that mean you have to be passive? It doesn't. Does it mean that you're going to allow criminal activity to take place? It doesn't. We've reduced crime 52% consistently over the last 3.5 years. I don't deal with drug dealers, wife beaters, child molesters, gangs, shootings. We're aggressive with that stuff. But I'm still a servant. And you can be a servant. You can be a guardian and still do a good job. So as you indicated in your work, we got to change lesson plans because we've been taught to be crime fighters. We've been taught to be warriors, and nobody wants to be seen as a guardian. Nobody wants to be seen as a social worker. Until we change those dynamics, we're not going to see a change. We've got to be on the front end of this thing and stop letting these movements dictate what we do.
Right.
But we're in such a crisis in this country that people are going to these movements are going to drive where we go. This is akin to the Rodney King situation or the O.J. Simpson situation where they change policing forever.
Well, I think we're dealing with a number of things. And one of those is that when you show leadership during this period of time, it is really difficult. If you make a simple mistake, it can be highlighted tremendously. So you got to be careful on some of the things you say and the way you deal with these issues. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Folks, if you're just joining us or you've been on the webinar, we're with Alfonzo Williams from the Burke County Sheriff's Office, an amazing, amazing leader. He stepped out front on CNN, talked about justified shooting in Atlanta. We're not trying to justify the shooting. We're talking about the issues and the circumstances that led up to that, the use of force that we've been training forever. It's a standard that not only the public, but the Supreme Court is upheld in terms of reasonable use of force. And so if you want to ask any questions, please put us on the chat. We'll let Al and I'll try to address them best we can. We encourage your involvement in this. There's no way that we're going to all have a voice unless so we want some questions from your folks. Please put them in the chat and we'll get to them. You look at this issue that we're talking about here. So how do we deal with a person? I know you said that relationship. I get that stuff. But you're going to have those outliers out there who are not going to go along with the plan that you and the preachers have established, or you and your organization have established. And I call them these lone wolves who have their own agendas, and they're now think they're famous because they've been on Facebook and they got 500 followers, and then get somebody out to a meeting and then go to counsel and get influenced. How do we deal with those? How do we deal with those folks who have a different agenda and they really don't care? They want to drive the negative wedge between the police and the community. How do we deal with some of those folks?
I think we by being proactive, by professionalizing ourselves, by forming relationships, by getting the leaders in your community to denounce those folks. You're not coming in here with that. I mean, I had, when this thing happened on CNN, I had business leaders, farmers, laypersons, people from everywhere in Burke County saying, we're not going to stand for it, and we're going to stand behind you, and we're going to support you, and we appreciate you stepping out. We're glad that you were first to step out. It was the right thing to do, and we are with you, and we're behind you, and we're going to take care of your family, and we're going to make sure you're all right. So I think that's because we've formed the relationships and partnerships. It's because we've already put in the work. We've already done the cleanup before the crisis. And now that we have a crisis, we have a solid base. And so we're not going to let those outside folks come in and influence what happens in our communities. And we've got to know those county commissioners and those city council persons. So when they start this foolishness about defund the police, we've just got to talk about how ridiculous that is. And when we've won this last re-election with a resounding 85%, I can pack a room, a commissioners meeting full of people, and it's not hard to get, and they're going to listen. 85% is a lot greater than 51% or 50% plus one. So we've got the ear of the folks who can help make those decisions and drive out those people, because, Dean, if you realize it, we're treating this like a 90-10. We give 10% of the bad employees 90% of our time. And I think that's what's happening here. As police leaders, we've got to be careful that we don't give 10% of those bad apples 90% of our time. I was talking to a reporter this morning who said, but they sound so loud. They seem to be drowning out the good people who are trying to talk real reform and who are trying to affect real change. But it's just a few of them. And I had to ignore thousands of them last week after that interview. I didn't make a single Facebook post because I'm not going to give them the attention that they don't deserve. Some leaders are. They're politically motivated, and so some of this has got to be fixed at the ballot box. Some of it's got to be fixed by forming relationships up front. Some of it's got to be people like me who are bold enough to say, I've got another 4 years. Let me use this bully pulpit to say the right thing, say what needs to be said, despite race, despite controversy.
Yeah. Well, that's the good thing about being a sheriff. You got sometimes 4 years, you got 4 years to make up, where a police chief might have 4 minutes. I mean,
That's right.
that's what they're thinking about. I mean, there's no doubt about that. There's no question. We got a few questions from the audience out here. Glenn Idman, who's a friend of mine from out in Missouri, he says that the ACLU is barking very loudly about SROs in schools, that we should, take them out. And I'm a strong advocate of SROs. We got them there because we learned we needed them. Now, don't just take and throw the baby out with the bathwater because you're afraid that law enforcement is going to make a decision in the schools that are going to be related to enforcement. So what are your thoughts on the SROs? And we're seeing a lot of barking out there, if you will, from folks about, and you're already seeing school systems that literally are pulling them out, said, you're done. We don't want any more in the schools. And now they're back dumping them into, what you got any thoughts on that, Al?
Of course I do. As a former school police chief for Augusta, Georgia, that had 4,500 employees and 65 schools, 32,000 kids across the district. I was there for 4 years as chief of police. And I can tell you that what we've got to do is, it was always tough to get administrators to realize that we were not just there to break up fights. And that's why you have these groups like ACLU who thinks taking SROs or school resource officers out of the schools is a good thing, because we'll deal with student behavior in a rules-based way versus a criminal agenda. And what I can tell you is that in Augusta, Georgia, where I was chief, teachers would not be able to teach were it not for school resource officers there to have some level of order. Now, what you've got to get the administration to do is to realize that we're there for more than just breaking up fights or enforcing some rules violation. Tell him to pull up his pants. What we've got to say is that we're there to teach values and respect and morality and decency. And we're there to establish order like we are here in Burke County. We're in our elementary schools here. It's not to criminalize kids. It's so that they get a respect for us early on. When COVID-19 happened, we took our 5 school resource officers and put them in cars and said, go to your neighborhoods, not just the public housing neighborhoods, but to all your neighborhoods, and visit with your children. And we put them on school buses, wherever the school buses were going into neighborhoods to drop off lunches for kids. The SRO is right there with the bus driver and the lunch assistant. So it was only to say hello, to check on them. How you doing? We're here for you. And so that's still forming those relationships. It's still cleaning up before the crisis occurs. So they know. I'm sorry?
No, I said one of the things I would think about for an SRO in terms of making a case for the police in the schools is, I would say this, that we're in a period of time right now where you have children from the age of 5 to about 15 who are in the middle of forming their opinion of the police. If you limit and take those cops out of those school systems as just a knee-jerk reaction, you're buying into the narrative that cops are bad. And I believe that we as a society need to join with the school systems to rebuild the relationships. And I think that's a foundational part of where we're trying to make our argument is, don't take the officers out of the schools. Matter of fact, right now is the time we need to put more in the schools, because that daily contact and that daily interaction with that police officer is going to diffuse that narrative that the nation is leading in saying that police officers are bad. I saw something the other day that it was, matter of fact, it was yesterday, that disturbed me greatly, because it kind of is indicative of what the narrative is happening right now. And you've probably seen this on the internet, on the web. You had a police car driving by and there's a siren. You could hear the siren going. And there was an African-American young man, probably would have been 9 or 10 maybe, was bouncing a basketball outside of his house. And when the police car started to drive by his house, instead of like most of the time, they'll either wave or stand and watch the cop car drive by. He actually hid behind his own car, what the car was parked in the driveway, and then waited for the police car to go by and then stepped back out and started bouncing the basketball. Well, you can't make that up. That was a reaction based upon a perception of what police are about. And right now, if it was me as a police chief, I would be, or any type of police leader, sheriff leader, whatever it might be, I would be aggressively having conversations with our schools about keeping those officers and that contact there as a point of us of reference of, we do have great cops. Let's keep that message flowing. And I would be overly aggressive in making sure, instead of pulling cops out, I would try to get my school system to believe that wherever I was, that, hey, this is not the time. There are still police. There are going to be still school shootings. The safeties of our kids goes way beyond color. So this is a time where we need to be pulling together. That'd be my thoughts on the school, on SROs. I think that when we put them in there, we originally didn't define their role as much. But over the last 10 years, we've done a pretty good job of balancing the role of the SRO. And to me personally, I'd use my SROs as a signal that we are the good guys and we're the people that really care about them. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right, Dean, but I think you might agree with this. 99% of the time when things go wrong, it's because leadership didn't do something they should have done. And if we started off not clearly defining roles and making it very apparent, I've had to change some mindsets when I was in Augusta. I've had to do it here in Burke County. Our folks are not here just to break up fights. We're not here just to walk the halls to make sure a gun doesn't get into the school. We're here to teach values, law, respect, morality, decency. And we're here to teach laws, to teach them how to be responsive to the police and how to be respectful. And so if we push that narrative, if leaders will push that narrative, rather than letting schools dictate and some administrator who knows nothing about the police dictate what we do. And I think our law enforcement leaders, here again, I think they have got to get out on the forefront of this and push this agenda. And we got to stop being reactive. We see what happens when we're reactive in our neighborhoods versus when we're proactive. And you and I, I love this slogan. There's nothing to be learned from the second kick of a mule. And how many times are we going to keep watching some movement push us towards more professionalism? Let's do it ourselves and cut out this craziness.
Well, I mean, I agree with you 1,000% on this. But right now it's a really tough time for us, and people are being cautious. Which it's okay to be cautious in leadership, but you've really got to get on the forefront of what's going on. And I have been, now this is just me now in a webinar, and I'm just saying this. Where is the IACP? Where is Noble? Where is the FOP? Where's the National Sheriff's Association? Where's these freaking perf people? Where are these people? They're wanting our money. They're wanting all of our stuff. They're wanting us to join. They're wanting to do all this, but where in the world are they when we're in the midst of this crisis period of time for our police leaders? One of the problems we have that I believe is, and I put this in these police reform thing the other day when I wrote, there's some things we got to reform. And if you don't think we got to reform police, you really need to take a really strong look. And it's not just race-related reform. There are some reforms that we need that involve, we've needed them before any of this occurred. We've needed it. When you look at the reform, I think that one of the problems is that people don't know what the role of police is in their communities. We need to decide what the role of police are. We're not social workers. When you take, one of the things that we teach officers, and I hate to even say this, but it's so true. We teach officers that in about 99% of the situations, you possibly can arrest your way out of it. And that doesn't work with mental health patients. That doesn't work in social work. And so when you send a cop to a scene, they're going to take action. They cannot help it. You know, and I'm so passionate about this. Let's decide what the role of the police are. Let's figure this thing out. But where are these voices? Where are these people who we claim or they claim that are the voice and the leaders in this organization and for law enforcement? Where are they? They're silent.
And that's what I'm trying to say. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. That's the question I've been wanting to ask. Where in the hell are all these people who put on these conferences and seminars, you know, 3 or 4 times a year? Where are they? Where, it took them 5 days in Georgia to speak up after I said something about the Atlanta shooting. 5 days before they said that's justified. Now, I've watched hundreds of videos and taught over 27 years. I can look at that video instantaneously and say it's justified. But it took the leadership 5 days to come out and say anything. The Georgia Sheriff's Association, the Georgia Chiefs of Police Association, the Police Benevolent Association, and any others. We have got, you talk about moving bureaucracy out of the way and getting people to do what's right. Push these movements out of the way. They are much louder if they will come out. But everybody's too afraid of their position.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We've got a bunch of people in the webinar here. If anybody wants to join in the conversation, just raise your hand. Kelly, we'll go to you. We'll come if you want to say something, you want to make a point, you want to ask us a question, you want to get in the middle of this conversation. Hey, we're opening the door up right now for you to be able to get in there. Join us by video. Let's hear your voice. We want to learn from each other. Al and I don't have all the answers. We want to hear from you and folks out there who maybe want to make a point to say what's going on. Now, I know I'm going to call on a minute one of my friends who has always got a lot of knowledge, and he's been in these webinars before, Tom Smith. Tom, I want you to come on in just a moment. Now, you've been in a lot of meetings and you have dealt with PERF on a number of these issues. And just so everybody understands, PERF is Police Executive Research Forum out of Washington, D.C. And I know that they are, you know, they do a lot of work. They kind of lead the major city chiefs movement around the country. PERF really has a real strong hand into that. So we want to make sure that we get, so Tom, if you'll join us in just a moment, I want to ask you up in Minneapolis, kind of what's going on up there. Is things settled any? What's going on with joining police departments? Are they having mass exodus of cops or those? So Kelly, is Tom on there with us?
Yes, sir, he is. I've asked him to join in. Tom, if you can hear me, just go ahead and unmute, and you're welcome to keep your video either open or closed.
Okay.
Come on, Tom.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, man. There you are, Tom. Thank you for joining us, man.
Sure. Thank you. Just a little bit of an update up from up here in Minnesota. And first off, Dean, you and Sheriff Williams, thank you. Your conversation is just so spot on. Up here right now, one of the biggest issues is the Union Federation president for the Minneapolis Police Officers Association finally spoke out. He's kind of had to go underground because everybody is kind of pointed the finger, and as he said in the news last night, made him the fall guy as far as what is going on over the decades with the relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department and the communities that they serve there. Some of the other things that have happened up here are that the Minneapolis Police Department, you guys were talking about school resource officers. You're spot on. I think it is so important to have school resource officers in the school. It's a knee-jerk reaction, but Minneapolis got rid of theirs last week. The sad part is, being the St. Paul guy and former chief there, last night our school board voted 5-1 to get rid of St. Paul police officers in St. Paul public schools. We've got good relationships. Very sad. Next off, the University of Minnesota, our largest state university, home of the Minnesota Gophers. they've severed all relationships with Minneapolis Police Department. They have a very small department. Minneapolis would supplement. Obviously, the college is located all on city streets, so they have severed their contract with Minneapolis Police Department. It's just crazy. I read today that in Chicago, DePaul University, which has a relationship with Chicago PD, they've decided to sever their relationship with their leadership program or master's program with the Chicago Police Department. It bodes back to everything that Sheriff Williams and you have said, Dean. These knee-jerk reactions are going to hurt us more than ever before. And I'm going to say something that, Dean, I know you know, and Sheriff Williams, you may have heard this before from Dean, but the LEADS principle. Right now, we need to have courageous conversations in law enforcement. Listen, explain, equity, and dignity. I think it's more critical than ever before. And I'll end with this. Last Friday, I taught a class on the history of race relations in law enforcement and implicit bias up here in Minnesota. It's legislated by our legislature and our post-board system. But I wanted to address the elephant in the room and what the officers were going through, small class of 12 people. One department's got a lot of credits in the Bank of Trust here in Minnesota, Plymouth PD. They said people have supported them so much, like Sheriff Williams said, they're bringing food in. In fact, so much food, they've got to turn it away to their people. They're like, we support you, because they had those credits, they had those relationships before this happened. But then I had another young female white officer in the room, and she gave this example. I stopped a car. She stopped a car last week on traffic. I had no idea who the driver was, but it was an African-American woman. She had 3 children, 3, 5, and 6 years old in the back seat, all strapped in by one seatbelt. So in other words, taking that seatbelt, that lap belt, putting one seatbelt, totally dangerous for the kids, right? For all those kids. So the officer just went up and said, listen, I'm going to help you to make sure that you can understand, I'm not giving you any kind of citation, but make the kids safe in the back seat. The woman gets out of the car, starts screaming in the middle of the roadway, she's harassing me, she's harassing me, I'm afraid of the police. So you get these two different opposite ends of the world, things that are going on right now. They're going on all over the country in departments that have good relationships. And Sheriff, thank you. Your courageous conversations, what you're going to do next week, bringing all those people together. Dean, you know how I feel. That's what we need to be doing right now. And then finally, PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum. They've done a couple webinars. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join. They put out things about this, but I have to agree somewhat with both you and the sheriff that between that and IACP, I get a lot of things in writing, but I sure haven't seen them on the national news like the sheriff. I sure have not seen him. I've seen some people from Noble, Sheriff, but they're retired people from Noble. They're no longer on the board. So you're right. Where are our leaders right now? Because, the experts are in our profession. We have to have relationships with our politicians, because if we let these knee-jerk reactions keep happening, it's going to take us decades to recover from this. And I truly believe that.
Well, I mean, Tom, you're always just like dead spot on with your commentary when you get on our webinars, and I really do appreciate that perspective. So what I'm taking from what you said about Minneapolis is that's the fallout from the incident of George Floyd. You're seeing hundreds of people being involved immediately, SROs losing their relationships. But now the one thing that is absolutely certain, the question needs to be asked of these folks who are severing these relationships. So when a major incident occurs, what would you like for our response to be? Do you think that we are now just all of a sudden going to be available because you have a major problem? We need to be talking about these things. Let's not be penny wise, pound foolish, and ruin years of relationships. We do things because they work. We don't do them because we just like them. And so when you look at these relationships, that's one of the things I'd recommend to have conversations with these chiefs and sheriffs, is to talk to people and say, we can't have these reactions and all of a sudden a month from now you get into a major event and we've got 3 or 4 or 5 people dead because we couldn't get there, or we couldn't give you help. We got to have these conversations, folks. We got to use our head here. There's no doubt about it. So, Al, you want to chime in on what Tom said there?
Yeah, I think he's spot on. I think we just got to have the courageous conversations, and we've got to get out the forefront of this. I think, yes, I agree with you. They need us. They can't do the job without us. But I think part of our problem on the law enforcement end is we have always understood that people need us and can't do without us. When COVID happened and schools could not have class, for about 3 days, parents got their kids up and got them dressed and had them come down to the kitchen table, and they thought they could teach them. And after about the 3rd day, that ended all of that because they realized they didn't have the tools and the wherewithal to teach. And they finally realized that little Johnny is bad. They had heard it from the teachers. They were sick of hearing it from teachers. But now when you're trying to keep little Johnny's attention at home and teach him something, you realize what that teacher was going through at school. That's what's going to happen in Atlanta and Minneapolis and across this nation. People are going to get to a point like these colleges and schools who are getting rid of these SROs, and they're going to think, we can do this, and we can do this through some other measure. And then they're going to quickly realize, oh, we need the police if we're going to have order. We need the police if we're going to teach without interruption. We need the police in these classrooms, in these schools, and walk in these halls so that we can avoid this gang activity and we can keep out those who don't want to learn. But we're going to go through some growing pains. And until you get these leaders who are hiding to come out of hiding, to take responsibility, to get out in the forefront of this thing, and to drive this train, if you don't bring yourself out, this movement that has ulterior motives is going to drive the train. So
Yeah.
the longer you hide, the worse it is. It's almost like a guy that's out on bond. You don't, a guy who's wanted on a warrant. The longer you hang out there and not turn yourself in, the worse it's going to be for you to get a bond and get out. So the longer IACP and PERF and all these other organizations, Noble, that's what made me mad as hell. I heard Chief Ramsey from Philadelphia Police Department make a statement on CNN. A retired chief from Philadelphia said they had no business chasing that man. They had his car. They could have identified him later. That is what got me mad enough to say, wait a minute, hold on. This is a guy who's retired from Philadelphia Police who was formerly the president of Noble. And I give a couple of $1,000s a year to Noble. I thought, hell, I won't go to any more of their sessions if that's what they believe. I'm serious.
Yeah, I think we've gone from common sense to the absurd really quickly. We kind of armchair quarterback and we see these knee-jerk reactions. So let me give you a second here, Al, to think about, let's put yourself in a leadership position to an organization that their morale is low. The cops are shrugging their shoulders and shaking their head. You can tell by the body language in the building that it is literally an environment that is reactive. Your officers have stopping cars. They've stopped paying attention. They've had the blue flu. You can't get anybody to work and you got call outs, and they're committed people and they're dedicated people, and we know they are, but they're in the midst of this. And I want you to think for a minute. I want you to think and say, what would you as a leader putting yourself, now I know that you've done a lot of work in Burke County, and I've seen it firsthand because I've been there and I've seen your people and I've seen the change. I was there when you first started there. I came there right after you first became sheriff, and I've been back since you've been there 4 years now. And I can tell you from anybody who may be watching this, there is a palatable difference in the people there, not only their attitude, but it's in the way they talk, the way they walk. The whole thing has changed. But right now we are in a major situation here. and there's no doubt about it. So what would you say to that sergeant, to that lieutenant, to that captain who hasn't done all those things that you've done? And to be quite honest with you, they might have joined in, chiming in that this is a shitty time and there's things are bad and things suck. What would you say to them?
In the 3 agencies I've led, every agency I've given a form to every officer, and the question simply asks, why did you get into this business? And I get all these answers, every agency I've done this, and I put it in the file. I want to help. I want to serve. I want to give back. I want to make a difference in my community. And those are all the things they say. And so when I have to bring them into the office and say, why did you take this action? You know, it almost go back to the girl with the 3 kids, and there's one seatbelt for all 3 kids. You know, we've got a program for that. And if it's affordability, why don't I get you some help here and get you 3 child seats? Now you're going to have to follow the rules. And I'm going to make some concessions for you here, but we've got something to help you. Giving her a ticket for all, and I'm not saying that the officer in this case gave her a ticket. That's not what Tom said, but it's relationships. You win them over one at a time. When I had that crisis last week, I answered my phone. I answered it repeatedly. Some stayed on the phone for 2 seconds to cuss me out. Some stayed on for 10 minutes. I talked to some people as late as Saturday for an hour and a half. People from around the country. And my leadership was saying, hey, that guy's calling from California. You don't have to talk to him. No, but some officer in California might have to deal with him. So let me take time to talk to him and try and reason with him. I'm not going to change his mind, but if I can get him to look at the other side, if we can stop the partisan bickering. But officers have got to ask themselves 2 questions here, Dean. Can you believe we would have a police officer that could graduate from the police academy this day and time and not be sure whether or not he could take a life? There are plenty out there who are not sure. Secondly, am I willing to work in this political environment? Can I put up with this? Am I willing to do this? You were probably just as mad as I was. The video from New York a few months back, several months back, where in the housing area where they doused the officers with water. And they said they were told by the leadership not to do anything. Are you going to put up with that kind of disrespect for a pension? Is that really where you want to work? Are your values that compromised that you would allow that to happen? Is that really who you want to work for? I'm sorry, I don't care how much they're paying. I don't care how great the benefits are. I'd pack up and move south if I had to. So
Definitely.
So officers themselves have to ask themselves, am I willing to do this job? And am I willing to endure this environment? And I understand it's tough to recruit during these times. Burke County stays full. And we have a waiting list of folks who want to come to work here. Because we got to get leaders who will let go of the ego, stop making it all about them, find a way to stop putting out fires all day because we're ignoring our people because we're too busy for them, and get down there with them and see them. It's not my job as sheriff to put on a uniform and go ride with officers. I don't do that. But they know that they can come and see me. They know I'm going to show up at muster. They know that I'm not embarrassed. Just yesterday, I stood before maybe 60 of our officers. And I said to them, don't you ever question whether or not the leadership has your back in a deadly force situation. I've got your back. Don't you worry about the 3-piece suit attorney who's going to come. Don't you worry about me not standing for you and with you. If you've done what's right and what's just and what's fair, I've got your back. They've got to know that. And they know when you're genuine and when you're not.
Well, I know and I agree with you 1,000%. And, you know, we get this question a lot, or I get this question a lot when I go around the country and, you know, and I talk. And I've always said this, that when I die, I want to be reincarnated as a Southern sheriff, because if I come back with reincarnation, I want to be a Southern sheriff, because a Southern sheriff has a great deal of power. They have a great deal of freedom to say what they want to say. They have a great deal. But now you're dealing with police chiefs, and you're dealing with people who are in appointed positions, who have people above them, if you will, who are making these decisions, like the mayor in Seattle saying, stand down. But I do give the chief in Seattle props with having the courage to say, that wasn't my decision, but I do work for the mayor. Now, I do know this, that in order to have impact, you have to have input. And if
Yes.
you're going to have input, you got to be in the job. You
Yeah.
can't be fired. So, I mean, let's put this out on the table. But I will tell you, in terms of police chief, and I'm going to speak to all my police chief friends out there and people that work in these police chief places. Now, I ain't never been in a situation like this. And I'm not trying to claim that I've got, you know, that I understand exactly everything you're going through. But I have had a situation where I've had to make a choice on the right thing to do, the morale of the organization, and moving it forward and not be a puppet. Now, I've had to make that decision. And I will tell you, one or two worked out pretty good. The other one, it became time for me to retire. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that that's good, bad, or indifferent. But every single one of us in leadership have a limit to what our leadership is. We have a limit to what we're willing to say or do, or we have a limit to what we're willing to put up with. So what I'm telling you is, get you a line in the sand on what you're willing to do, where you're willing to stand for your people, but don't make it about you, a line in the sand. Make it about the values, make it about the issue that you're taking a stand on, because you can't die on every hill now.
That's right.
You can't die on every hill. But you got to make those choices, and you have those faces that you have to look at every single day that you go to work that are counting on you. They're counting on you to be their voice. They're counting on you to do the things that are right, and you're not going to always be right. But you got to step up and have guts to make tough decisions. And they're not going to be popular all the time. Find you that mark and don't cross it. And you
That's
say,
right.
that's the line. That's the line that I'm going to tolerate, and that's the line where I'm at right there. Now, all this other stuff, I get it. I can deal with that. But when it comes to safety of my cops, I tell this about people all the time about morale. I tell them this. I say, I've dealt with morale problems as much as anybody. And when morale's bad, it's always the chief's fault. That's just the way it is. And I accept that, and I understand that. People don't realize they have their own individual morale issues. But when I paid particular attention to morale issues, there were two kind of marks that I would use to try to pay attention to those. And when you pay attention to those marks, here's what I would use in terms of my line in the sand. If it was a matter of safety, I absolutely paid 1,000 attention to it. Like if it was cars that were not working, if it was the equipment they had that wasn't good, if it was a safety issue, it could cost lives or anybody get hurt, and people would bring that up and they'd say, you know, that car ain't got brakes on it. And you guys, I'd say, hey, hold up a minute now. Let's pay attention to those things that cause morale. But if it's a matter of opinion, then I'd be a little more flexible on the morale.
That's right.
Matters of safety and matters of principle. If it was a principled standard that literally I was not willing to cross, then I had one time I had a mayor come to me and ask me to do something about tickets. And I said, hold on a minute now, let me tell you. Now, this ain't the same situation here. But I said, I'm going to tell you something right now. I don't do anything with those deals. I don't mess with those. If you want that done, you talk to the judge, because that's not something I'm willing to do. You have to make those decisions early in your career. And if you haven't made them, then you're in a world of hurt right now, I'm telling you, because they're going to get you to blink and flinch at every single damn thing that's coming out there. They're going to ask you to blink and flinch. And when you blink and flinch, your people are going to see it. You have got to lead the way. Set your line, establish it, have those discussions ahead of time. Don't wait till you get into a crisis period of time to say, well, I'm not going to do that. You should have already known that before. I'm not putting those officers out there in harm's way without the right equipment. I'm not doing this without doing that. Make sure you have those. But you have to be, as a boss, and I know this, it's not easy. But let me tell you what, the cost can be severe if you're not willing to take those stands. Not easy at all. Al,
I agree with you. I just got to say, everybody, God appoints all of us, despite what your beliefs are, all of us are appointed to do certain things. Not everybody can speak out as I did on CNN about the situation. If you're a chief and you got to feed your family, then we know you can't speak out. But what you can do is give some encouragement behind the scenes. What you can do is give a thumbs up to your officers. You can bring them in for a meeting and say, we're going to stand behind you. We're going to support you. As a chief, you can build relationships with the media. I get called every single day, every day. The news reporters go in for a 9 o'clock meeting, and they know that they can depend on Burke County to come and find a story. We've got some feel-good story when it's boring in Augusta, 30 miles from here. That's our largest city, 200,000 people. When they won't talk to them, they know Burke County will. And they know we've got something going. So I'm building up, I'm investing in the bank, as Tom Smith said. So they know that when things hit the fan last week, it's why the newspaper is calling this week saying, hey, how would you like to do an op-ed to further get your point out there? It's the local media saying, hey, let me give you some time to express yourself. And we don't have any trick questions. I just want to interview you. Come on down. Let's get it done.
And I think
Good, bad, or ugly, we're not going to hide from them. People have come to trust our Facebook page. They know that we're going to put it out there. We have more followers than our next largest city, which is 200,000 people. We have 17,000 Facebook followers. People know that it's going to be there, and we're going to tell the truth, and they can depend on us. That's the capital that we need, and you'll have that base that you need. So as a chief, yes, maybe you can't speak out, but what you can do is find ways to mitigate the issues by having undercurrents, by having people in place who can speak for you. And you maybe it's just you're behind the scenes pushing it forward and giving the encouragement, picking up the phone and making a call, sending a handwritten note like Hobart did last week after our webinar. He sent me a handwritten note saying, thank you for your advice. That gives you a little more oomph to do what you need to do and to speak up and speak out when you need to do that.
Absolutely. One of the things I want to mention to the departments out there and people that are with us on this webinar, don't stop the post, the Twitter feeds, the Facebook things. When you've got people interacting with kids, put it out there. You got people with the feel-good stories, put it out there. I guarantee you, I've been watching my Twitter, I've been watching my Facebook, I've been watching all those. We have stopped sending good messages out. As a law enforcement community, we have greatly diminished our messages over the last 2 weeks. Stop doing that. Put those back out there. Keep putting those stories out there. You have got to fight those. You can't do that. You have got to keep your message flowing. We've stopped. I've seen them. The feed has went from, I might see 100 a day of agencies all over the country. I bet I ain't seeing 10 or 5 or 4 now of good feel-good stories and cops out there interacting with people. Don't stop that stuff. Keep it going.
You're right about that. Last Saturday, I was on the phone with a guy from Philadelphia who was very, very angry with my position on CNN. And he called my personal cell phone. I was on the phone with him for an hour and a half. While I was on the phone talking to him, he finally simmered down and stopped calling me really bad names. I didn't hang up on him. I wanted to talk to him. He was just very upset and couldn't believe that I would, right in the middle of a revolution and a change of police practices, here I am, a black man with a bully pulpit talking the talk I was talking. That's his stance. And while I'm talking to him and listening to him and he's hearing me out, I get a homeless family, a man, woman, and 2 kids, and she's pregnant again. He yells across the street to me while I'm on this phone with this guy and says, "Can I approach you?" I said, "Sure, you can approach me. Come on over." I muted the guy who's on the phone because he was ranting about something. And he said, "My family is homeless. We don't have anywhere to go. We don't have anywhere to eat, to take a bath. Will you get a hotel room for us?" And I said, "Of course, meet me down the street here at the hotel and I'll get you a hotel." And while that guy was still in my ear saying all the things he had to say about me and arguing his position, I went to the hotel, I checked the family in, got them a room and put them away for, and I asked the clerk, I said, "Do you know this family? Have they stayed here this week?" She said, "Yes, one of your deputies was here 2 nights ago at midnight and bought a room for them on Sunday. Or I think whatever day it was, he bought a room Thursday. And then on Friday and Saturday, somebody else paid for the room. And then Sunday, I was there to pay for it." And I wasn't looking for any attention, but I posted it on our Facebook page. And man, you go look at it. It's been shared 1.5 thousand times. It's gotten hundreds and hundreds of comments from people all over, not just Burke County. So I think you're right. I've talked to chiefs of really large agencies and they say, "Well, my media is not interested in feel-good stories." Well, market yourself.
Absolutely.
Do your own Facebook, do your own Twitter, do your own Instagram, do your own whatever social media platform you have. But if you'll get the right relationships with the media, they'll cover some of those feel-good things too. But it's mostly your self-promotion. And as you know, we self-promote. And we've just got the following we have because we're doing that. I think it's important.
Well, absolutely. So we're about an hour and 10 to 15 minutes in. We're getting ready to close this out. Alan will give you in just a moment the kind of the last word. I want to thank all the people who have joined in with us here. Thank you for being a part of our webinars. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. One thing about us at LHLN, we are absolutely going to lead during this crisis period of time. We're going to get people on there. We're going to try to help you. We'd like our numbers to be as large as they can, but that doesn't matter. We don't care if we got 2 people on here. If we're helping 1 person, it doesn't matter. We're going to try to help as many people as we can get through this crisis period of time, be better on the outside of it. Let me tell you right now, what's the cost if we don't? If we don't help each other through this crisis, the cost is too great. We cannot swing and miss on this very important time, on this very important issues we're facing right now. The leaders out there, call me, contact me, email me, whatever you need. I'll do my best to help you through this. My best. I've got be able to get in touch with many, many people that can give you way better advice than I can. But I'm telling you right now, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you on joining us on LHLN. And Al, I'll let you close out the program here with your final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dean, for having me. I've enjoyed it today. I just think that we've got to speak truth. We got to stand up when it's right. Look at how we missed the opportunity to denounce the Brunswick, Georgia situation. And then we missed the opportunity to denounce the Minneapolis situation. I'm talking about a united front standing together. Imagine the credibility we would have as Black and white leaders if we had stood together and publicly denounced those 2 situations. We would have been building political capital if we stood and said what was right about Atlanta, if we had been united over here on Minneapolis and Brunswick. We're missing opportunities.
Absolutely.
Somebody said,
Al,
a trainer called me this morning and he said to me, in your forum next week, you're talking about police reform. Don't forget to mention public reform. The public's going to have to understand they've got to follow order. They've got to have law and order. They've got to be decent.
Absolutely.
And so I'm going to take that into my deliberations next week when I meet with them. But all in all, you've got an 8-step plan. I've got a 7-step plan, which includes professionalizing us and just making us better, getting us better educated, psychological evaluations and assessments, federal standards, federal retirement. We can't have 67-year-old officers out there still trying to fight with some 25-year-old. It's just not working for us. We've got to do better. We don't want a national police force, but we want some national minimum standards. And it can't be things like, okay, well, you know, Georgia hadn't taught chokeholds in 30 years. I think that's a good standard to have, but we're way past that.
Oh, yeah. Well, Al, I want to thank you again for joining. What I'd like to do is we're going to stop recording and we're going to just open this up. If anybody wants to join us on video, I know last week